So we've got a lot of great questions, and we'll just start out with one question here. Can you talk about some of the open source alternatives that can be used, Joseph, to make things such as Esri story maps? What else is out there that is free for everyone to use and create?
Sure, we're living in an era of nice combinations of maps and multimedia these days, and so there's a couple of other story maps-ish kind of platforms. One is called storymaps.js for JavaScript. There's also mapstory.org. There is the Knight Ridley story maps tools. So there's other ways of making story maps.
Great, thank you for that. I know you talked a little bit about how to share your content, but what about situations where some of the data has to remain secure and can't be shared publicly? Can you make internal story maps that are not public to the whole world?
Yep. So remember when I was in the zone of my stories, and there were those buttons that said private, public, or this middle zone, where the middle zone is, I think, where you might want to think about. You're only sharing the story map with your own organization. In other words, people with a login to your own organizational subscription to ArcGIS Online, or a subset of those people, like I was saying, 5 or 10 researchers that are just in your research group, and that's the only ones that can actually see your these story maps. There are other ways to share content outside of story maps, just with a small group of people and not making them public. Story maps, by their nature, they're really meant to be shared. That is the whole idea of let's share what we're doing with others. But sure, there are definitely ways that you can just have a few people looking at them or nobody at all.
Great, thank you. We have a question here about out-of-the-box features versus features that need to be developed. So can you talk a little bit about, highlight some of the out-of-the-box features that are most commonly used versus common features that people develop either using JavaScript or other coding algorithms, and what type of tools should a person have in their back pocket to develop those additional features? And how can you tell the difference between the two?
Yeah, well, to tell the difference, spend a little time looking at the builders, the builder modes, as I guided you through the map tour and the map journal. And you can see in there that you've got the capability of adding things, mixing things around, changing the header and things like that. So by going through the builder mode, you'll get an idea of what the actual builder tools do. Now, is one of the links that I had in there was toward the bottom. It was the third method, and that is actually downloading those files that make up the story map into your own device, and then uploading those onto your own server. And before you upload those onto your own server, you're customizing just a few of those files. Now, the example that you'll see in that slide that I showed is a story map I made on Bruges, Belgium. And there are a couple things I did in there that are not part of the builder mode. One of the things I put in there is a couple of shape files. I had those brought over from ArcGIS Pro. I'd actually digitized those in ArcGIS Pro. I have some polygons, I have some pop-ups in there, and I brought those into my story map. So I'd say, a little bit of GIS skills will help, a little bit of HTML. One of the links I have in there is a story map on the Lakota language, and instead of the standard captions that are text, I actually have the English and the Lakota word for landforms that I developed with a colleague of mine, and I recorded his narration of the words in both languages, and then I uploaded those MP3 files, just audio files, to a site online, and then the caption is just a pointer to that MP3 file. And in order to direct the user to that file so they could hear it, I had to do a little bit of HTML, just basically href equals, just the standard HTML stuff. So that's helpful. And then the third thing I would say, besides the GIS and a little bit of HTML, is a little bit of JavaScript would go a long way. So those three things. But I would say if you look at the gallery of story maps like we did earlier in the webinar, folks, I would say a good 90% of all of those story maps in there are actually using the builder tools, just out of the box, no customization required.
Great, thanks for that. One other question talks about sharing editing capabilities on one story map. So can you have a group of individuals edit the same story map?
The way that story maps are accessed is by username, as you saw when I was referring to ArcGIS Online, the organizational account, you signing in. The collaborative nature, there's a couple ways to incorporate that. You could have a story map pointing, for example, to a Google Sheet, right? So if your Google Sheet is editable by multiple people, your story map points to your Google Sheet and your content of your story map updates. I've got a blog on that if you're interested. I could even put it in the chat box. Another way of going about that is there is a crowdsourced story map app that I've also got a short essay on how to use that. It's not really meant for massive projects. It's meant for small projects, but that's another way of doing it. Over and above those methods, story maps are really not meant to be multiple collaborators. There are other tools to have people input data. For example, we've got a tool called Survey 123, where you're having, if you share that survey with the public or with a group of researchers that you're working with, they can add data into that, and your story map would point to that survey that they're filling out of, I don't know, tree conditions in your community, or the condition of the river at X time, or whatever it happens to be, and that feeds into story maps, because story maps can tap into live feeds, whether they come from a webcam or a citizen science community filling out a survey. So there's ways of approaching what you're talking about, but by and large, they're meant to be authored by a single individual.
Good to know. Thanks for that clarification. We have one question here about tailoring the knowledge and skill to design story maps for K through 12, especially for high school students. Do you have any tips, or are there guides out there for how to get high school students creating story maps?
Absolutely. Our team works quite closely with K-12. We have been doing so since 1992. Right now, I'm running a story maps course for teachers, and you're welcome to join that. It's out on enetlearning.org. And I'll put that in the chat box. It is called Telling Your Story with Story Maps, and the bulk of the people in there right now are primary and secondary teachers. So we talk about how to make these, but at least 40% of the course is, how do I teach with this? What could I do with this in the classroom? How do I assess student work? All that sort of pedagogical aspect to it. So yeah, I'm right with you. I've seen very powerful maps from students at all grade levels, really, using this. You can also use it as an instructional tool, just with the story maps that exist online. You can teach about climate, weather, et cetera, natural hazards, population change, and so on. So thanks. Yeah, I love that question.
Thank you. So one other question that we have has to do with recommendations for how do you attribute photos, videos. Is there a tag when you upload a video or when you share an image? Is there a way that you can add a meta tag that shows the attribution for that specific image or video?
Yep, absolutely. There, like I was indicating here in the chat box, the Spatial Reserves data blog, I'm very keen on, documenting your data and documenting your sources and understanding your sources and so on. So if you're going to be the author, and these days everybody is an author, that's the exciting thing about this platform, folks. Everybody can author a map. That being said, there's a whole lot of content out there of varying quality, right? So if you're going to be an author of a story map or a web map, you want to practice what you're preaching. You want to document what you're doing, and so there are various ways that people have done it. I'm not sharing my screen right now, but at the bottom of some of those things that I showed, there is a very nice section, for example, in a map journal where you document your sources. It's actually a section in there, and so the Elwha River, for example, if you scroll to the bottom of that one, you'll see exactly who authored it, where they got their sources, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I'm right with you. It's very important to do, and even in the story maps, my stories area that I showed, which is sort of your sort of metadata area, you can put in tags and and you should put in tags and a description and so on about the sources you're using. Awesome. You folks are great.
We've got still a lot of questions still coming in, so we'll continue to field as many as we can, and then we'll make sure to pass along any additional questions that we weren't able to get to Joseph, or if you want to email us, we'll definitely pass those along as well. So we have a couple more that we can take. One is, as an author of many books and articles, do you have any recommendations for boosting creativity as a story map storyteller?
Actually, yeah, that's a great question. What I'm seeing, and I was just talking with the fine AGI folks before the webinar began, I'm starting to see different departments on a campus that never would have touched, anything GIS related, geotechnology. Conflict and peace studies programs, history programs, and certainly some of them actually had touched geotechnology in the past, but many more are now saying, okay, I don't need to be totally immersed in geotechnology, but I want to use some of these story maps as assessment instruments, or to teach with, or to foster creativity in my classroom, to have students present with these multimedia web mapping tools. And so, yeah, it is a very interesting phenomenon how it's encouraging people, because you have almost complete flexibility over, okay, how do I want to classify the data? How do I want to symbolize the data? So you think about all the cartographic aspects to this and how maps are really powerful tools, right? And we want to be careful about how we're presenting the information so that it's accurate and so people understand what we're trying to communicate. So I love what you're saying, and it's one of the exciting things about this whole embracing of story maps. Maps have been telling stories for thousands of years, right, folks? I mean, there's nothing new there, but the way that we can embed and incorporate multimedia and share this in web pages and in presentations of various kinds, it's just opened up a lot of new avenues for maps as storytelling devices. Again, capitalizing on what, the compelling nature that maps have had for thousands of years.
Thank you. So that's about all we have time for today in terms of fielding questions. So if you have any questions that you would like to go ahead and email us so we can forward them along to Joseph, please go ahead and do that. You can email them to us at GOLI@AmericanGeosciences.org, and we'll make sure to forward those questions along. So thank you, Joseph, for sharing your time and expertise and insights with us today. We sure learned a lot, so I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to share all this great information with us.
Thanks, folks. I had a blast and hope you did too.
We did. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. This concludes our webinar for today. We look forward to seeing you next time, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.